Okay, it being 5:30, I shall call this special council meeting of the town of Fort Frances, it being session number 43, to order. The purpose of this special meeting is for council to deliberate the 2024 draft operating budget for the town of Fort Frances. Before we begin, I also want to welcome Chelsea, our deputy clerk, who will be clerking her first official council meeting this evening. So thank you for being here, Chelsea. We'll go to the territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that the Rainy River District is covered by Treaty 3 with the Anishinaabe Nation. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest, and if so, state the general nature thereof? Seeing none. Before we begin, I would like to ask Council's permission to slightly change the order of the agenda. In talking with administration, we thought that the flow should deal with all aspects of the budget first before we look at any of the other issues. So what I'm asking of council is if we could do items 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, temporarily skip 4.5 and 4.6, then do 4.7 and 4.8. So that's all the sections of the budget. And then we would go back to the two that we had skipped over. Does anyone object to that? I'm seeing none. So by consensus, Madam Clerk, we'll show that the budget has been changed as indicated. Okay, with that then, we will go to item 4.1, which is the introduction to the 2024 Town of Fort Frances operating budget, and we will go to Mr. Travis Robb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To start off tonight, and kind of further to my report that's within everyone's budget packages, I really wanted to just start off summarizing to Council where administration has come from in the preparation of the budget that you have before you today. After our initial compilation of all of the budget, we were at a deficit of $1.2 million, thereabouts. Of that, $928,949 were directly related to uncontrollable cost increases throughout the budget. These increases don't include things like power, natural gas, sewer and water, and fuel across the organization. And it also doesn't include revenue losses related to the loss of bearskin at the airport. So administration went through the exercise of reviewing the budget individually first with myself, and then as a group line by line to make sure that all of the expenditures and revenues made sense and were realistic. From that review, we have the budget that is before you today, with an increase projected at $877,736. So to achieve this, we made many cuts across all budget lines, but there were three primary cuts that were made at my direction. The first was the removal of additional seasonal parks labor that had been added in to assist with the work and the day-to-day operations of the new splash park, as well as just general increase in staff time and work at our various green spaces across town. Second was the removal of 2 museum summer students, bringing their total from 5 down to 3. And lastly was the removal of funds related to the rental of trucks to assist in expedited snow removal for the winter season, due primarily to the fact that we're at least part of the way through the winter and we've had very light snowfall this year. So at this point, administration really has cut all it can from the budget without impacting directly service levels. And at this point, once the budget's been introduced, Council really needs to provide some clear direction to administration on where they want us to focus our efforts for the next round of cuts, which will have impact to service levels. As I sent out earlier, the plan for this evening is for us to go through the summary pages of the document. Each manager will go through their area, highlight some of the biggest changes, And then after that area has been summarized, if there are any questions specific to it, we can open the floor up and have those discussions as well. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just before we begin, I have some remarks as well. And I wanted to point out that in my 4 terms on council, this is the most challenging operating budget that I've ever had to deal with. I do want to thank administration and staff for the large amount of time and effort that they have already put into reducing the budget to the version that is before us. I would further add that our budget was already lean prior to this and in previous years. Prior to the administration having a look at it, and in previous years, we had made a number of cuts. Our spending has been prudent and careful, and our stewardship of taxpayer dollars has also been very, very careful. It's important to note that even before going into looking at the budget, that over 40% of our budget is comprised of expenditure over which we have no control. Indeed, 2 of our largest budget items are the cost of policing and the levy from the Rainy River District Services Board. And in addition to that, we also have the levy from the Northwestern Health Unit. The municipality has no control over these items at all. One of the main reasons that this is such a difficult budget is uncontrollable increases in the cost of living, which translates to increased costs associated with operations, such as fuel, insurance, salaries and benefits, cost of materials, utilities, and other expenses. These have all increased. And again, the municipality has no control over this. Simply maintaining the status quo is more expensive due to increased costs over which the municipality has no control. To maintain the services that we now provide will cost more and will necessitate, if we are to maintain them, a property tax increase. On top of this, the province has not kept up its fair share of funding to municipalities. OOMF funding, that's the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, is one of the main operating grants that municipalities, especially small northern and rural communities, receive from the province. This grant was originally put in place to fund services that were previously paid for 100% by the province. The province then downloaded these services to the municipalities. And with that download, municipalities had to assume the cost of these services. The agreement with the province was that the province would fund these services through the OOMF. But OOMF funding has not kept pace with the cost of living. And in fact, the OOMF funding that the town of Fort Frances receives has decreased this year. So that means that ratepayers in Fort Frances have seen and will see their property tax increase simply in order to fund services that the province used to fund. This evening, difficult decisions will have to be made. There are only 2 possibilities. We can pay for the rise in uncontrollable costs by increasing the tax levy, or we can decrease the cost of services by reducing the services that we normally provide. Neither option is particularly palatable, and the solution to the dilemma that we face today will likely have to be a combination of a tax increase and some reduction in services. And this evening, then, it will be up to council to decide which, if any, services to reduce and by how much property taxes should be increased to provide the necessary revenue. So with that, we will go to the first part of our budget in item 4.2, which is the 2024 Corporate Services and Administration and Finance Budget Considerations. And I believe our treasurer is going to, I apologize, I didn't see you there. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, Travis, could you repeat the total impact? It seemed to be different than what's in our report.
Excuse me, the total budget increase is 877,736.
Okay, because I think our report says 982,877, or,
That's the total increase in uncontrollable
oh,
costs.
okay, thank you. Another thing I just wanted to comment on,
Yes.
if I may. Further to your comments, Mr. Mayor, about, the province not maintaining their fair share of government funding, I have circulated a notice of motion that I will bring to our next council meeting next week. And you may have also seen in your email today a resolution from the Corporation of the Municipality of Kelvin. And again, it's a motion that's been drafted by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and it specifically speaks to that issue. And they're asking all municipalities in the province to approve a similar motion. So I'm hoping to see some support for that next council. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Brunetta. And now back to 4.2, and I believe our treasurer is going to take us through that one.
So I'm going to go at it from the summary page.
Yep.
And then if there's more questions, then we can answer them. So starting at the beginning under corporate services, 0150 is our taxation, which is the municipal taxation. This increased revenue takes into consideration the notional tax rate, which is a 0.03% increase to the prior year's tax rates based on the 2024 assessment roll. 0151 is education tax. So there's no change here because basically we collect the money and then remit it to the school boards. 0152 is payments in lieu of taxation. The reduction in revenue is mostly due to the international bridge tax calculation and some unknown variables now because of the bridge being sold. We're working on getting new data, but without anything firm, I'm not confident to place a value there. 0240 is the next one. It's governance, mayor and council. There's an overall increase here of $28,366. This includes the reduction in the OMPF grant, an increase to council pay per bylaw 8323, which is the council remuneration bylaw, and an increase of $10,000 to the allocation for the conferences and courses. This represents an increase in the cost of travel, as well as an additional $1,000 per member for virtual training opportunities. 0260 is program support. This is increased by $229,766 due to the projected increase in the Rainier River District Social Services Board apportionment levy. Doctor recruitment is consistent at $68,000. 0261 is elections. There's an annual cost for systems there, which is the same as 2023. 0272 is our contribution to reserve funds. There's an increase here by the 1.4% of the 2023 taxes, which is equal to an increase of $173,100 in accordance with the town's asset management plan's suggested increase. 1820 is the economic development. There's savings this year due to an NOHFC grant for our new economic development officer's wages and some benefits up to $100,000. As 2024 will be the first full year that we have an economic development officer, there are some new expense lines as well as reductions in other lines such as contracted services. And 1824 is our solar panels. We're seeing less revenue in those lately, so we've reduced that.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Councilors, do you have any questions on this portion of the budget or any comments that you'd like to make? Councilor Bien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to our Madam Treasurer. The contribution to reserve line that you talked about, 0272, You say it's 1.4 increase over last year is what the recommendation is. But yeah, at the end, it says it's a 7.91% increase over the 2023. I can't quite understand the difference there. If you can, thank you.
Yes, through the chair. So it's a 1.4% increase over what we collected in taxation revenue. So I think we had like 12,000 some odd dollars, or sorry, 12 million and some odd dollars of taxation revenue. So that works out to 173,000 for the 1.4%.
If I may.
Go ahead, yes.
I'm just wondering where at the next column over, it says it's a 7.91% variance between the budgets. I'm just wondering where that number comes from.
So
Go ahead.
through the chair, yeah. So the 7.91% is the percentage increase just on that one line, right? So 2.187 to 2.36 million is 7.9% increase, but the 1.4 is actually on what we've collected for taxation revenue. So it's not 1.4% of our last year's contribution, it's rather 1.4% of taxation revenue. Make sense?
Any further questions or comments on this portion of the budget? Councillor Olson.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm looking to under 1,200 contracted services, and I'm seeing the operating forecast for 2022 and 2023 under the Point Park litigation was $100,000, with the actuals being close to $500,000 those 2 years. So I have a question to administration, I suppose, of why the anticipated budget for this year is again $100,000, knowing the actual has been double, almost triple that in some years.
CAO Rob?
Thank you through the chair. A good question, and one that the treasurer and I have talked about at length over many days. Initially, I had planned to increase that again based on the schedule for the year, the expenditures over the last couple of years. We opted not to. We have a lot of unknowns coming this year with that litigation, and we do have a reserve dedicated to Point Park. That if we did see substantial cost overages, we could, through approval from council, utilize those funds to cover those costs if the need arises.
Thank you, CEO Rob. Further questions? Councillor McTaggart?
Thank you, Your Worship. After we're gone through everything, we'll have a chance to
Yes.
come back. Okay.
The plan was we would go through all portions of the budget, and then I'm going to say, councillors, what would you like to do?
Thank you.
Last call for questions on this portion of the budget. Okay, we'll go to 4.3 then, which is, oh, did I miss that? Okay. So 4.2, is that 4.2? Yeah. We did corporate services, but not administration and finance. So now we'll do administration and finance. And back to you, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you. So number 0251 under admin and finance is town real estate. There's increased costs here due to the purchase of 833 Portage Avenue. 0252 human resources. There's one-time costs associated with CAO recruitment as well as fire bargaining. 0262 is administration. Increase of 11,808, mostly again comprised of salaries and benefits and some changes to Moffat fund budgeting and conferences and courses. 0263, just a slight change with the mechanic salary and how we estimate the vehicle expenses for maintenance each year. 0264 is the clerk's department. Again, salaries and benefits are our main change, as well as advertising and office supply changes. 0265 is Treasury Department. The increase here, again, comprised of salary and benefits, as well as there's one additional charity rebate that we had to put in, and office supplies, financial software costs, and of course, insurance. 0266 is unassigned revenue. We've projected an increase of 54,700, which is mostly interest, because we've been doing better at interest. And 0268 is information technology. Again, salaries and benefits are our main component, as well as some new cell phone plans, server warranties, and placing our budgeting software under IT.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. And that concludes the administration and finance portion of that budget. Councilors, do you have questions or comments on that portion? Councilor McTaggart?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in 0430, the POA expense or income, what are you anticipating out of that in terms of positive income? I'm on page 4.
Oh, we're not there yet, Councilor McTaggart.
I'm sorry?
We're still on 4 point.
It's in the
Oh, you're into it. Okay, into the,
Amend and find?
you're down into the weeds, certainly. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So is it the management fee that you're looking at, or
Where
the
do we see the
POA
income versus
share?
the management fee?
So POA, sorry, through the chair.
Yep.
The POA revenues are all through a POA budget, so they're not included in here. So all you would see in here is our share, I'll say. So we get 10% of the POA revenues. In many years, it's between 280 and 300,000 that we do collect in POA revenues. So we get 10% of that for just hosting the POA within our building, et cetera, right? And then what happens is all the net costs are then shared amongst the partner municipalities. When we did the 2024 budget, because there's so much downloading with the Part 3s, we projected $0 share to all the municipalities. So I don't have a value in here for our fine collection. Did that answer?
Care to follow up?
So at this point, we're anticipating no income out of POA, other than the 10% administration.
Correct.
If that's the case, maybe there's a petition to government too.
Make a note. Further questions? Seeing none? Oh, Councilor Mackey.
Thank you, Your Worship. On that point of Councillor McTaggart's, I don't know if this is where it would ever show up, maybe not, but do we get a full financial report from that grouping? The POA court, how much does it gross? Where are all the expenses? An actual breakdown, because we aren't seeing it here.
Madam Treasurer?
Yes, so annually, council actually does approve their financial statements. Once they're complete, we will be getting them audited very soon. We do all that in-house here. Like, we do the work in-house and we get BDO to audit it, yeah.
Okay. Follow up, go ahead.
So approximately when might we see that?
My guess would be between March and April.
Okay. Further questions on this portion? Okay, seeing none. Now moving on to 4.3, which is an overview of the 2024 Emergency Services operating budget. And for this one, we'll go to our CAO, Travis Schwab.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll start off, we're on page 2 of the summary. We'll start off with 0410, which is fire. Most of the changes here is related to increase in wages. There's an increase in vehicle parts for replacing some equipment tires that had aged out based on an NFPA regulation. And there is a one-time fund in here for leasing a decontamination site while fire or renovations are happening to our current fire hall. Moving on to 0420, which is the police. As noted in my report, we do have a $65,000 increase to our OPP contract for the year. 911 services is remaining the same at 0421. 0422, Police Services Board. We do have some projections on the revenue for that based on some assumptions that are made on our new Police Services Board model, which will come into effect on April 1st. Emergency measures increase here, and that is really related to staff time for training for the CEMC alternate designation. And that is all for emergency services.
Okay. Thank you. Councillors, any questions on emergency services budget? Yes, Councillor Bernetta.
Thank you, Your Worship. I understand that you made a delegation when you went to, was it Toronto for Roma? I'm just wondering if there's anything more we can do. I did see some time ago in the news that Dryden received a reduction in their costs at some point, and it was before a municipal conference. So I'm just wondering if there's anything more we can do to reduce our allocation.
Are you referring to the
OPP.
police services?
Yes, thank you.
We had a very good delegation there. We were certainly listened to. Of course, you're always listened to. And the upshot of that was they were going to look at it. They were going to call our CEO, and they were going to see with the new police services boards and the new police legislation coming into effect, could there be some savings to us? That's where it was left in Toronto. I don't know if CAO Rob wants to add to that.
Yeah, certainly I can. Thank you through the chair. I've had a couple of emails back and forth with the Office of the Solicitor General, but at this point in time, we have not connected to get a better understanding of what opportunities there might be for reducing policing costs.
But I'll just throw the comment that with these types of delegations, you just have to keep repeating and repeating and repeating, and slowly, gradually over time, we may get our message through. Because, Councillor Bernetta, you're right on. We're paying the second highest cost in the province of Ontario, the highest cost in the Rainy River District, and it's not sustainable. Councillor Bernetta?
Yeah, and I guess Dryden recently, I believe, moved to the OPP as opposed to their own municipal police force. So perhaps there was some consideration for that. But yeah, I think we need to keep on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bernetta. Councillor McTaggart.
Just further to that, I think there's been discounts for some other municipalities in the Northwest in terms of policing costs. So I'm hopeful that we can keep pounding at this, and I think the minister indicated that in the CSPA there may be an opportunity for discounts. So
yeah, he did, and we'll keep on it. Thank you, Councillor McTaggart. Further questions on emergency services? Okay, I see none. We'll move to 4.4 then, which is the community services operating budget, and we'll go to Manager Nathan.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through the chair to council. So when we look at our handy van transit system on an annual basis, the town is mandated to increase their contribution of the handy transit service by 2%, and we've balanced this budget to meet that requirement. Moving on into Sister Kennedy Center, 1220. Outside of salaries and utilities, there's been a status quo or significant decrease to expense lines to better align with our actual spends. The increase in the overall budget stems from the recently completed expansion of the center and the anticipated utility costs that are aligned with that. We did receive an increase in provincial funding this year, and the senior center has been able to increase their revenues for their programs, and so we do see an increase of 7% in our projected revenues. However, the majority of the expense increases are centered around, again, the expansion of the senior center. There are 2 additional reports for this section, one in closed session this evening that is reflected in the budget in front of you, and then one that we've tabled to further on into the meeting that is not reflected in your budget currently. Moving on to Sunny Cove, 1614. This budget is based on Sunny Cove not operating in 2024. Although we have some capital projects in the works for design projects on that, it is unlikely that Sunny Cove will reopen for services in 2024. And so we reflected the budget for that, and just we're able to decrease on our minimal maintenance and insurance costs for that section. Moving on, we're going to look into recreation programs, community services, and recreation facilities all together. So this is 1620, 1621, and 1634. And it is important to look at these 3 sections together as they do overlap quite a bit through the department. When you review the budget, note that a number of the expenses have been shifted between these lines, and so that shows a decrease in one area for an increase in another area, and that was just us better consolidating and tracking our actual expenditures. The recreation program 1620 consists of our drop-in membership and registered programs. There's a projected increase in revenues impacted by the updated user fee bylaw, as well as reintroducing programs that were put on hold in 2023. This is a significant increase in conferences and courses, which is critical for ensuring that our recreation and aquatics team are prepared and ready to continue offering quality programs to the community. That includes recertifying all of our lifeguards this year in 2024. Moving into community services, 1621. This represents the administration component of the 3 sections. Increases are based on reallocating certain cost centers into the one area. So for example, all of our copier supplies removed from rec programs and removed from rec facilities, put all into the community services budget lines. There's also an increase in conferences and courses, which is critical for achieving our division goals. Looking into recreation facilities, 1634. This consists of our building maintenance and our permits and rentals for the Memorial Sports Center, East End Hall, and 8th Street Trails. We do see a major increase in facility rentals and anticipate a continued increase in 2024 revenues, again based on the user fee bylaw, as well as us being able to bring on fitness contractors to increase our program delivery. And our user groups are seeing a return to capacities that were stunted because of the closures in 2020 to 2022. The majority of the increase comes from the addition of the 8th Street Trails into the operations budget, which is just under $10,000. Council can expect to receive an additional report again later on in today's meeting. The budget impact of that report is not reflected in the budget that you are currently looking at. Moving into 1631, Sorting Gap Marina. After a season of operating the store last year, administration was able to scale back our projected revenues to a more realistic target based on the revenues that we saw in 2023. This is a total reduction in revenue projections of $18,400. The other major impact to this section was the PIL tax in 2023, totaling $18,000, which was an unbudgeted expense in 2023 and is a requirement for the town to pay this continued tax. So we've reflected that and added it back in. That again has shifted that major percent increase with the 18,000 removed from projected revenues and the 18,000 added into the expense lines, it makes it look like there's a significant impact, which there is. Moving on to 1635 for the Townsend Theatre, there is no net cost with respect to the theatre, and so that budget stays status quo. The Fort Frances Public Library 1640 and 1641 was presented on last week by the library CEO, so I'm going to skip over that section and move into 1645, which is museums. The museum focused heavily on developing partnerships in 2023, and these partnerships impacted the ability to develop and offer internal programs that are tied directly to the museum's revenues. It is important to note as well that there was a federal student grant received in 2023, which included 2022 portion and 2023 portion, and we've since removed that grant, knowing that we are not receiving it for the 2024 budget. When removing the unbudgeted federal student grant from the revenues, we've seen that the museum in the past had been over-projected in revenues, just under $30,000. And so we have gone through and reallocated our projected revenues more in line with the service level that we are able to deliver from the museum in 2024. As a response to the reduced revenue projections, we have made significant budget cuts to expense lines to better reflect the current service level at the museum. These cuts included the reduction of summer staff, event expenses, and advertising expenses. The increase shown is a reflection of the significant decrease in projected revenues. As you go in line by line, you'll see that there are also decreases to our expenses, but that's again what gives that larger overall impact to the budget. And with that, I will pass it back over to the chair.
Thank you, Manager Young. Councillors, questions, comments? Councillor McTaggart.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just could you refresh my memory on what PIL is, that $18,000 expense?
It's the payment in lieu of taxes. So basically it's an expense there and it's a revenue in our PIL section of our taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Bernetta?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, there's a large increase in the marina expenses, but I'm just wondering if there's some way we could monitor more closely the launch fees. It seems some people have told me that they wait until the marina closes and then they launch. So I'm just wondering if there's some way we can monitor that more closely, or.
I don't know if anybody who wants to tackle that, if anyone.
Yeah, through the chair.
Okay.
We do have a system in place that we are monitoring. I think that with the turnover in staff and the timeline of where we were at last year and changeover in management, and this being passed over partly between the ONF team, partly between the rec and culture team, that we weren't able to put necessarily the full weight of our resources into that area. That has been highlighted, and we are working on systems to target those.
Thank you, both of you. Further questions or comments on this section? Okay. Seeing none, we had agreed that we will bypass temporarily 4.5 and 4.6, and that brings us to 4.7, which is the 2024 operating budget for planning and development, and I believe CAO Rob is going to present this.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Not a lot to talk about in this area, but we'll start with the Civic Center 0253. Mostly just changes in wages, utilities, not a huge change there. 0440 bylaw enforcement and animal control. A bit of a re-evaluation on the revenues that are coming from the bylaw enforcement area, as well as a shift in wages with the staff that are currently there. Moving to the animal shelter, really, basically no change there for the year. Moving to the building official 0445. We took advantage of some unusual building permit fees that we knew were coming in or had already come in for the year for a one-time substantial increase in revenue for the building official area. Other than that, pretty much everything has stayed status quo there. And planning and zoning, a bit of a reallocation of some costs associated with that area as well, coming out of 1810.
Thank you, CEO Rob. Questions, councillors, or comments on this section of the budget? Councillor Brunetta?
Thank you. I know anytime we try to balance a budget, obviously we look at reducing expenditures and possibly increasing revenues. And I have to say I was one of those naysayers about parking meters in the past. But further to what you said, Mr. Mayor, around the fact that this year has been a very challenging year, and I think we are getting to the point where we need to look seriously at other ways of ensuring that we continue to provide the services that we have, but by making some of those hard decisions like looking at possible parking meters. So I'm just wondering if that's something we might see brought forward in the future for discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Brunetta. Anybody want to comment on parking meters? CEO Rob?
Just on parking meters, in my time with the town, I feel like I've seen parking meters come before council 3 times. Yeah. And it can come a 4th time if council should so wish. But it would be the capital cost, the implementation is a big piece to it. So there would be that whole component of it that would have to be considered and budgeted appropriately.
But certainly it can be an agenda item on a future council meeting if you wish. Okay. Further questions or comments on this section of the budget? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to 4.8, which is the operations and facilities operating budget, and we'll go to Manager Craig.
Good evening, and thank you, and through the chair. I will be rather than line by line, because so many of the lines within operations and facilities are very similar, so the message is the same for line by line. I'll talk a bit more broadly about each one. So the first section will be transportation services, which is essentially 0611 through 0671. Some of the big changes in this area is that we've removed hired trucks from this area. We did use them for 1 week, so we'll have a small cost there for this year, but overall the large item that we have annually will be removed, and that's reflective of the winter that we have had so far. Broadly speaking, across all of our GLs, insurance costs have impacted us in operations, as well as wage increases, and then the general utility increases of 3% increase for facilities, 3.6% increase for streetlights, 3.7% increase in electricity for traffic lights. Plus, we've added the additional set of traffic lights at Lily Avenue for additional operational costs there, as well as the pole rental from the Power Corporation went up approximately 4.7%. Natural gas increase of 1%. We used to have a budget item in capital for small tools and so on, and that has now been put into the operating budget, and that's about $8,000. As well, many of the budget lines have been aligned to match historical costs and revenues that we see. And within all of those GL lines, there's a lot of realignment of labor between the different departments that's reflective of the work that we do at Public Works on a daily basis, month over month and year over year. Excuse me. Moving into environmental services, which I'm categorizing as 0840, 0850, and 0860, garbage collection, the landfill, and recycling services. 2024 will be our first full year post-transition for recycling services. We're still not fully to the full transition to the producer responsibility. We have opted in, as you will, which basically means we are still collecting the recycle. We're paying that contractor. However, we're now getting reimbursed for that, and that's largely reflected in these three sections of the budget. We have a large amount of revenue coming in now for that, as well as we've eliminated that cost of processing the recycle now, as that's now on to the producers. As well, the Municipal Hazardous Waste Day, which is a very popular event within the town. It's well received by the citizens. However, it should be noted that the cost of that has increased year over year from 2020 through 2023. The cost of the event has increased by over $5,000. To this year, it was just over $35,000. And then again, within these GLs, the alignment of the GLs to historical costs and revenues. Moving to the airport, which is 0860, 61, and 62. Obviously, the big story with the airport is the loss of the Bearskin Airlines scheduled service later this spring. We do have a positive impact from leasing the airport garage to the Ministry of Natural Resources. However, we also had the man camp on site that was being associated with the mill demolition. That is now gone, so we have lost that revenue. However, with that being gone, the insurance cost has also decreased at the airport. We're also facing, like other areas, the increase in electricity costs of 3.3% and wage increases, and then just general alignment to past historical costs and revenues. Looking at parks and cemeteries, there's probably the big story, I guess, with parks and cemeteries is the new costs associated with operating the splash pad, roughly $85,000. Insurance costs have increased, wage increases of 2.5% again, the same utility increases that every department is facing. Again, the small tools capital budget has been put into the operating budget. That's approximately $6,000. During the manager's review of the budget, we've already eliminated one seasonal park staff that we had originally added to the budget. The intent of that additional headcount was to help service the splash pad, Rainy Lake Square through the week, and other parks and cemeteries amenities throughout the town. There's $10,000 included to maintain the trees at Point Park. That includes $5,000 allocated to internal resources and $5,000 to external resources because we have to do some contracting out to work on the high tops of the trees that are dead and need to be cut down. There is an increase in columbaria sales and revenues. Those continue to be very popular. I guess it's apropos to say the only thing you're sure of in life is death and taxes. So, and then just general alignment to historical costs and revenues again. Finally, water and sewer. The big story with water and sewer is we've brought in-house the wastewater treatment facility, so we will realize the savings there over having the Ontario Clean Water Agency operate that. Chemicals were kind of a mixed bag with respect to the water treatment plant. Some chemicals we actually had significant price decreases, and others had some increases. So all in all, we're in a good position chemically speaking. There are increased operating costs with some of our aging infrastructure. So we are expecting increased maintenance costs there. We did have quite a favorable decrease in electricity cost for the large electrical users. So that's the wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant, and like the Memorial Sports Center, an almost 14% decrease in that cost. So that's a very good news and welcome. We are seeing year over year an anticipated increase to the water and sewer reserves of approximately $215,000, which is an 8% increase over last year. That's the nutshell version.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Councilors, any questions or comments on this portion of the budget? Councilor McTaggart?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. What kind of savings are we anticipating at the wastewater plant going away from clean water contract?
Through the chair. When we did the analysis back in the fall, it was around $48,000 per year.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Yes, Councilor Mackey.
Thank you, Your Worship. In regards to reducing the snow removal budget by the 30,000 by getting rid of the extra trucks for 2024, are you talking for the spring, or are you talking this spring and this coming fall? I guess that's
Go ahead.
my first.
Through the chair. Councillor, it's for the entire year, so both the winter, spring, and the fall, winter. However, operationally, we typically don't get into having hired trucks until after the new year. We generally don't have that much snow accumulation that we're getting into snow removal activities before sometime in January.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bernetta.
To the treasurer, I'm just wondering, do we have a separate reserve for the Point Park? I know we received a $1.4 million settlement, and I thought it was allocated specifically for the Point Park. So I'm wondering if we could take that 10,000 that we're allocating for the tree removal out of the reserve as opposed to our operating budget.
Madam Treasurer?
We do have a separate reserve fund for that. Yes, you're correct. That is always an option for sure, especially since it is a one-time cost. If it was an annual thing, I wouldn't want to make habit of taking from reserves.
Further questions? Okay, then. So then that brings us to the portion of the meeting where the councilors need to sharpen their pencils. And where would you like to see us try to achieve some savings? I think we should shoot for at least $100,000 in savings. Councilor McTaggart?
Your Worship, at this point, could I just get clarity on what kind of increase we're looking at overall?
You may, and we'll go to the treasurer for that. Overall?
Okay, so the 877,736 equates to a 7.17% increase to the municipal tax rate. And it's 6.68% increase if you add municipal and education together. So in a sense, we save a little because the education rate hasn't increased.
Okay. Follow up, Councillor?
Thank you.
Okay. So, councillors, suggestions? Yes, Councillor Kirchhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the treasurer, I believe when one of the first budgets I was involved in, our industrial mill rate was compared to Dryden, and that was a recommendation of one of the consultants. And it was reduced significantly so we would be competitive with Dryden. I don't see that that's made a difference with attracting any industry here. How much revenue would we gain by going back to what the mill rate was?
Madam Treasurer?
So that was the large industrial, not the industrial. Large industrial went down to the industrial rate. At this point, I'm anticipating that for 2024, there probably will be 0 large industrial revenue coming in. So at this point, I don't see that that's going to help us for this year's revenues. May it help in the future? Possibly. May it deter people from investing in our community? Possibly as well, right? I don't have a magic ball, so I'm not sure the right answer.
Thank you. Councilor McTaggart?
Thank you, Your Worship. You had suggested $100,000,
A minimum, yes.
a minimum, and in terms of percentage increase, would that be about another % off, give or take? Can you give us an idea what that would get down to?
Through the chair, I just happened to do that equation. So yes, dropping 100,000 would get us to a 6.35% municipal rate increase, and that works out to 5.92% for municipal and education together.
Thank you. Councilor Bien?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to echo the comments you made earlier when we're talking about balancing. We're trying to find sustainability for our community versus affordability for our residents to pay for it. And it's a tough balancing act for sure. And certainly if you look at the overall budget, you know, well, we're not going to cut 877,000 out of the budget. That's impossible. But at the same time, I don't want to cut nothing either, because I think that's not right either. I think as a council, we have to do our due diligence to try and find some savings so that we do reduce the tax increase as minimal as possible. And just in general terms, seeing the landscape of the land and the times we're in and what we're seeing in terms of cost of living increases and all that, I don't want to say comfortable, because I hate to see any kind of increase, especially for people who are on fixed incomes like our seniors, et cetera. But I can live with something that's in the range of 5 to 6%. I think that's, as I said, as a reasonable increase that we can maybe aim for. And so I'm being along those same lines then as what we've been discussing just now. I have a specific question. I know maybe this is a sacred cow, but the 1.4% that our asset management plan tells us to increase to reserves each year, if we just do 0.7, that's an $86,000 savings there. If we do a 1% increase instead of 1.4, maybe we're saving 75,000, give or take 75,000. That would go a long way towards the 100,000 we're trying to find. Is that I'm sure that Madam Treasurer wouldn't recommend that per se, because I do understand the reasoning behind it. But back in the day, they didn't anticipate $1 million increase in uncontrollable costs. So is this the year where we maybe don't put as much into reserves? So we still put 100,000 in instead of 175,000. That's my question. Thank you.
Did you want to answer that, or? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll take that one. my favorite topic. I mean, I'll be clear. This is definitely something that we have talked about around the management table, and you're 100% right. When we're facing, what we're facing, there's nothing that we didn't consider and talk through. This is a challenging one. I mean, you look at the work that we're doing on our assets right now. Just trying to keep the doors open and the lights on in a lot of our facilities. Keeping roads up, keeping sewer and water infrastructure going. It seems to be the it word of any discussion that happens around this table, comes back to the asset management plan and assets at end of life or nearing end of life. So it is a challenging one for sure to look to say, okay, well, we're gonna, we know we have this huge infrastructure deficit, but we're going to put less money towards addressing that. So it is a challenging one, but I can understand the appetite for it at the same time.
Councilor Brunetta?
I think that's a good compromise. But also, as a member of council, and I see that our budget was increased by 10,000. I know it's not a whole lot of money, but as a councillor, I would agree to tightening our belts as well, and maybe not taking as much training or sending as many people to conferences. I definitely would agree to reducing that number. And then if we could move that 10,000 from the operating budget to that reserve, as we talked about for the trees for the Point Park, every little bit I think helps. So, and then if we look at this asset management percentage as well. Thank you.
So just before we go on, I see the treasurer is writing, you're making a note of these things, because I think everything that's been presented so far by councilors are things that we can look at cutting. Certainly, we can cut the council budget. Certainly, I think in this particular year, in this particular case, that we could reduce the percentage going into the asset management plan. It's just up to council to decide how much. And I also liked your other suggestion, Councilor Bernetta, we could do that as well. Councilor McTaggart?
Thank you, Your Worship. I note in the garbage collection portion that there's a very large transfer to reserve funds of $350,000. It's on page 29 of the ONF section. Could I have a little information on that large increase in the transfer?
Manager Miller?
Through the chair. Those are largely from the revenues that we are now receiving through the reverse logistics group, which I'm just trying to find here. On page 28, there is, where are we at here? Just give me 1 second.
The revenue's on page 30.
There we go. 215,000, just over 215,000 from recycling, as well as curbside collection costs of 119,700, and just over 6,000 that we receive for advertising revenue, like to promote recycle and so on. Those are the drivers of that increased contribution, and plus the removal of the Emterra processing costs.
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you. So this is newfound revenue for us, or less expense than previous?
Yep. Follow up?
Yes, but there's a cautionary note with this too. This isn't a forever revenue. This is this year and next year revenue.
Thank you. We're talking about this year. And through your worship, is it, what are our reserve situation for the landfill at current? How well funded are we?
You want to take that? Or
I certainly can.
go ahead.
So we have an obligation to fund a post-closure liability for our landfill site, which is 60-ish thousand, 65,000, something like that, I believe. Testing my memory here. So that we have to put in every year to cover that liability. We have been working over the last probably 5 years to increase our contribution to reserve, knowing that a landfill expansion, which will be extremely costly, is knocking at our door. And our operating costs to operate our landfill are going to be substantially higher. Our capital costs to build a new landfill are going to be substantial. And we don't want to be in a rate shock sort of situation when that arises in the next not very many years.
Councilor McTaggart.
Thank you. I wonder if it's possible that we take a portion of that money towards reducing our overall operating costs.
What do you think about that?
I'm really mindful of the asset management, because I know that we have a lot of streets and that are in need of repair, and I'm really kind of committed to that 1.4, but this may be a possibility here of this money.
Everything's on the table, Councilor McTaggart. Did you want to comment on?
It's on my list.
Okay. So we've put that on the list as potential. Okay. Another one?
I have another one.
Okay.
Thank you. We have a property at 833 Portage Avenue, which we acquired in order to get easement to the underpass lift station, I believe. And it'll hopefully at one point come back for sale. And we took the money out of reserve for that purchase. And do we need to put it all back in? There's maybe some dollars there that we could use too.
Does anyone want to comment on that?
Sure, I will. I guess depending what we got for it, because right now it's sitting basically in inventory held for sale. So I need to get rid of that and put the money back into reserves. If there was surplus, then perhaps we could use it towards something in the budget. At this point, I don't know when it's going to be for sale, and I don't know what it's actually valued at. We might be upside down on the purchase, I'm not sure, right? So I know that wasn't a good answer for what you're probably looking for, but I don't want to count on that money is basically what I'm trying to say.
Do we anticipate it coming up for sale this year? CEO Rob?
Yes, hopefully very soon.
So there is a possibility that there might be some surplus there that we could use. Put it on the list. Anything else, councillors? Yes, Councillor Bien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I'm just looking into the weeds here in the corporate services part of the budget. And with the International Bridge, I see you say you're reviewing that closer with the sale of the bridge. But I'm just curious how we had budgeted $30,000 in 2022. We only got $288 out of it. Am I reading it right? Now we budgeted $30,000 in 2023, and there's nothing under actuals. And now we're not budgeting anything for 2024 so far. What kind of impact would that have? And because I think when we had our bridge meeting at the Manitou Mounds there last month, Shogun had talked about the impact of taxation on some of their expenses,
Yes.
and yet I'm not seeing it reflected here. So I'm just curious the discrepancy that I'm seeing, unless I'm looking at something wrong. Thank you.
Madam Treasurer.
You are looking at it correctly. So 2022, when there was a small amount, there was actually adjustments that needed to be made going backwards. So that impacted that year. 2023, I have billed a whopping $410 to the municipal or the partners that own the bridge. Essentially, the bridge doesn't have a value on the American side at this point. So through the OREG, where I can charge bridge taxes, because they basically paid minimal for bridge taxes in the US, I can't charge anything more. So it's unfortunate. In the past, the value was roughly $750,000. So the taxes that they paid in the US were substantial, and then that equates to Canadian dollars, and it's even more substantial. However, this year I'm still kind of at a loss. I've been working with the assessor and the bridge owners just.
Thank you. Councillor Kircher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As follow-up with that, is there any revenue generated from Custom and Immigration Building?
Madam Treasurer.
Yes, certainly there is revenue through our regular taxation for that building.
Follow-up, Councillor Kircher, or are you good?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Further questions? Oh, Councillor Olsen.
With us now having our new ECDEV, do we anticipate any more revenues coming in under that service for this year?
Who wants to take that? CEO Rob?
I'm not sure what sort of revenues would be coming in. We do have a grant that is funding the majority of the expenditures related to having that position for the next 3 years through FedNor. So, I mean, there's some additional costs related to that service. But I'm not sure what other revenues you might be thinking is going to come in through that.
Okay. Follow up, Councillor Olson?
Yeah, I was just referring to, any specialized grants to help offset the costs with some of the, the higher expenses that we're coming into for 2024. If our new ECDEV person will be looking into that.
Yes, here, Rob?
Yeah, certainly. He's he's got his eye on any grants that we can utilize in any sort of way. However, none of those are guaranteed. What the programs are, what the funding amounts are going to be, what we can use them for. So unless we know for sure that we are getting them or there's a high likelihood we don't budget for those.
Okay, Councillor Kircher, then
Thank you.
Councillor Bernetta.
I'm getting back to the industrial rates. So there's no heavy industrial anymore in our jurisdiction, at least that's developed. Is there a way of looking at the light industrial that we can do to help ease some of the pain?
I mean, I guess the answer is that we can set the tax rate for any of the categories within legislation at what we wish. I don't know if you want to weigh in further than that.
I was just thinking, because I'm not sure if that, I can't think of the word. I think it might be capped. Like,
Yeah.
I was just going to look it up. Not capped, that's not the right word, but we may be restricted on how high we can go if we're already over that. I'll see if I can find it quickly.
While she's looking for that, are there further questions? Councillor Kircher?
Just that I seem to recall with, I think it was the BMI group reduced from heavy industrial to light industrial. I think they saved $65,000 a year by doing that, which comes out of our budget.
Okay. Councillor Bernetta?
Yeah, I think further to what Councillor Olson was saying, the real impact on so much of our taxation is because of the lack of an industrial tax base, and I think it's maybe further to what Councillor Kircher is saying as well, that if we should get through our economic development officer some interest in terms of development of an industrial size, then it will definitely assist in the reduction of taxes. So, this is why we brought our economic development officer in-house, because we wanted someone who would be on the job, full time just for our community. So we're really hoping that we'll be seeing some movement in that area.
I'll just remind councillors that everything's on the table, so if you have questions or you think that we could save some money and do minimal damage to our services, this is what we need to do. This is why it's a difficult situation. Yes, Councillor Bien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first thing is more of a comment than anything, but I'm on page 5 of the corporate services budget in the line-by-line bit, 0.0135 per acre charges. And when we're talking about the railway taxation issue that we are talking about constantly, so the public has an idea of what we're just talking about. There are the lines. You see Ontario Hydro, they pay us $35,000. Railroad acreage, $11,302. Like, we have single-family homes that are paying upwards of $5,000, and here we have a multinational corporation paying $11,000. So that's why I just want the public to understand why we are pressing so hard to change or rectify that railway taxation model, because this is what we're looking at. I apologize because I've lost my place in terms of where it is, but I just also noticed that solar panels isn't sort of meeting what we've anticipated or what we projected? I know we sold the daycare center, that lost some revenue there with the panels, but is there a reason why it seems like it's not, is it meeting what we thought it would meet, or are we not meeting what we thought it would meet?
Manager Butler.
Through the chair, that's a great observation, and it's actually one that we noticed during the budgeting process. And I've engaged the electrician working for the town to help us investigate why the revenues have been down. I mean, obviously there's going to be seasonal variation with weather and so on, but my gut tells me that the decrease is beyond seasonal. So we want to investigate, and if it's something that needs to be repaired or replaced, certainly, and get that revenue back.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, councillors, if there's an appetite for higher level cuts. You can't really save much by going into individual budget lines. But I mean, you could look at some of the services that we provide, for instance, Sister Kennedy, the Storting Gap Marina, the library, the museum. Is there an appetite for a blanket percentage cut on some of those services, say a 1% or a 2% or a 3%? Those types of things will add up. Just putting that out there. I know that, yes, Councillor McTaggart.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did have Storting Gap Marina on my list, and I'm wondering if there's a way we can increase revenue there or reduce the cost, or we go back out again, maybe to public tender. It's a $40,000 net expense to us at this point, $41,000. So, and I forget who had asked. Councillor Bernetta had mentioned about the launch fees, and there's probably opportunity there. But again, it comes back to staffing and having people there, the hours that are required to watch those things. And but it's one that kind of, to sell ice cream, which I love going and having, but it's a lot of expense there for not a lot of income.
Councillor Bien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In regards to the library, and we had the presentation last week by the CEO, and I'd asked a question about summer students, and I know that we looked like we've reduced some summer students in the museum, and I asked if there's a possibility of what the budget might look like, the impact if we, didn't hire as many summer students at the library. And I think there's two right now they're looking at. By my rudimentary calculation, I'm thinking it might be a savings of $5,000 for those two students over the 8 weeks, given that there's some grants to cover a lot of their wages in some respect. But I'm also worried about what impact. It's a relatively minor savings in the budget, but yet it sounds like the one reading program was highly dependent on one of the summer students, and some of the STEM service or programs they offer would be one of the duties of the other summer students. So I'd be worried about what impact it would have on services. But I think that is an option we can look at. Maybe we can get some further clarification from the CEO. I also talked about in our own budget deliberations at the library board meetings about cutting hours. I mean, the library right now it's got its hours, but I had already asked Mr. B, the CEO, to look at maybe start tracking attendance at those shoulder hours from say 10 to noon and from 6 to 8 on the 4 nights of the week that it's open till 8 o'clock. Is there a savings of 8 hours there? We cut 2 hours a day. But again, it's something I'm willing to throw out there and look at. I'm just not sure what the actual number might be in terms of savings, but instead of opening at 10, we open at 11. Instead of closing at 8, we close at 7, those kind of things, and see what kind of impact that might have on the budget. But again, as you said, everything's on the table, so is that something we need to look at? Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on that. I think in the case of services such as that, I don't think council should be telling them where to make the cuts. I think if you're considering a cut there, we should say we would like to see an X percentage cut, and then you decide, because you're the experts, where you can make that to have minimal impact. But I do think everything's on the table, and I think that's a possibility, as are some of the other services that we mentioned. If, I see we're drying up for ideas, but go ahead, Councilman.
I will make one other comment, that it's not going to be very popular, but it is Sunny Cove. And again, we have to look at the impact that's going to have on the budget. We've discussed it already. Administration came back to us last year with saying, hey, you know what, maybe we can't afford to have that anymore. And it's costing at the expense of other services and programs we offer in town. So again, is that something, I mean, we've already committed to looking at some improvements in what it would cost to improve Russell Hall or rehabilitate Russell Hall. And we're going down that path, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be a lot to operate that camp. And are we at a stage again where that's on the table where we divest ourselves of that property? Thank you.
Yeah, I think people have to be aware that we're getting funding mostly from the Northern Heritage Fund, but we have to upfront, what, about 25% when we, and that's significant money. And then again, if we follow through with rehabilitation and the renovation, then when we operated, in the past, we operated at a significant loss of, again, I think about $40,000 a year. Anticipating that things aren't going to change a lot next year, we'll be in a similar situation next year. So you do have to think about things like that going forward. So again, this is why we're here. Council needs to make this decision. Administration has done what they can. I'm just wondering if we could take a bit of a break and maybe quantify some of the things that we've written down. For instance, I would be in favor of at least reducing the asset management plan from 1.4 to 1%. That would, how much would that save? Roughly. You have that already?
I don't. I have a question about that. Do we?
Yes.
Do we want to have administration try and calculate all this out right now, or do we take all of your suggestions back and come back at another meeting with,
yes,
here's all of your suggestions quantified, vetted, and then what do you want to proceed with?
Yes, that. Okay, so, yes?
So if I can follow up on that.
Yes, please do.
You put some ideas on the table.
Yes.
Am I adding them to my list?
Yes.
That's a question for everybody, not just.
Yeah, because they're being reticent, so I'm going to be the bad guy and say, yes, put them on the list. Is there anything else you want on the list that administration will take away, and then we'll come back for another meeting on this? Councilor McTaggart?
Thank you, Your Worship. The decontamination rental space is for the cleaning of the fire equipment. Is that urgent for this year?
Go ahead.
I've had a good conversation with not all of the firefighters, but a good amount of them. There is some reluctance to look to another space for decontamination. That said, there is some opportunities to attack some low-hanging fruit in the current fire hall. If council recalls, in our capital budget, pending grant approval was a substantial hall renovation, primarily to deal with contamination, or decontamination, I mean, sorry. However, whether we look at another space or look at making some kind of quick changes to tackle some low-hanging fruit, there's opportunity for both.
Councilor McTaggart?
So that would go on the list then?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Olson, did you have your hand up?
I did, thank you. I'm just wondering if somebody could provide a summary of this list that everyone is writing and speaking to. I just want to make sure that there's nothing missing for when we come back together.
Who you have the list? Okay, here comes the summary.
Through the chair. So I have a goal of $100,000, which was the discussion.
At least 100,000.
At least 100,000. Reduction in the asset management contribution. Reduction in the council training allocation. Looking at moving some of the tree work at Point Park to reserves. Looking at moving a portion of the recycle revenue reserve transfer. Library, museum, Sister Kennedy Center, sorting gap, general cut of a percentage, I'm not clear exactly what the percentage, 3 to 5% is what I heard. And look at removal of the funds for the fire hall decontamination.
Anybody object or anybody want to add anything to the list? Yes, Councilor Brunetta.
Sorry, maybe I missed it. Your suggestion of a 1% across the board, was that in there as well?
My suggestion was for those services that I mentioned, X percent, to be decided. And I think administration would give us some options. Here's what a 1% would do. Here's what a 2% would do. And so on. Any other comments on the list? Either yay, nay, add, subtract? Okay. Thank you. So now we need to continue on, and we'll go back to 4.5, which is the seniors companionship program, and I'll put a resolution on the floor. I'll need to get it moved and seconded, and we can discuss it. Recommendation reads that council directs administration to sunset the seniors companionship program from its base level of service. Could I get a mover and seconder, please, on that? Councillor Behan? Councillor Olson? Any discussion on this one? Councillor Behan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. This is a tough one because we have a relatively low number of clients, 14, I believe it is, active. But I worry that of those 14, this may be a very valuable program for them, and you hate to see anything get cut that really is a lifeline or an individual. So I really understand the importance of programs like these to help our seniors to tackle loneliness, isolation, and things like that. But you're also looking at it, if you're looking at an additional $17,000 or a total expense of $17,000, that's more than $1,000 per client, which I don't think is reasonable or feasible either. So in that respect, I think I have to agree with the recommendation to sunset it because the age-friendly committee is now no longer there. The grant that we had is no longer there. I would love to see another group be able to take over this and get volunteers to run these because I do think the program itself is of value. Is there another grant out there that we can utilize? I think you wrote down, Mr. Young, that there is no funding currently available, but I'm not even sure if the Moffat Fund could help with this because that doesn't really deal with operational expenses, et cetera. But I'm just curious because I think the program itself was worthwhile at the time, but I understand circumstances have changed. And when you're looking at $1,000 per person to run this thing, that is very expensive. Yep. So that's why I'm tending to agree with the recommendation put forward, but it is a tough one because I do realize that for those 14 people, this may be very, very valuable to them and their well-being. Thank you.
Did you want to comment, Manager Young? I noticed you were kind of...
Yeah, if that's okay through the chair. I just wanted to clarify about the comment made about available grants. It's not as much as there aren't necessarily grants available, as much as we don't have the capacity to administer those grants with our current levels of staffing and support. And so there are grants that are available, it's just that we don't have the ability to facilitate them at this time.
Councillor Kircher.
Thank you. Has any effort been made to see if anyone else would take over the program? CEO Rob?
I just want to remind council that this isn't a town program. This never was a town program. It was a program by the Age Friendly Committee that we supported in a few small ways. And then when the Age Friendly Committee dissolved, it by extension became our program, but it was never our program to operate or fund other than some small in-kind contributions.
Yep. Further questions, comments? Councillor Kircher?
I'm not sure that answered my question. Have you looked for anyone else to take over the program?
Say, oh, Rob.
Council hasn't given staff direction to take on this program, is what I'm trying to say. this isn't our program.
Thank you. So if this is something that council feels is valuable at a future meeting, you could instruct administration to look into this. But I think it's important that people do understand that the municipality often supports outside groups and helps them get grants with their ideas, but then sometimes the groups fade away. And those programs were never the town's responsibility. So although they're wonderful programs, the town does not have the capacity to keep adopting orphan programs because then the financial responsibility falls on us. And look at the situation that we're in this evening. So further questions or comments on this? If not, I'm going to call the question. So recommendation is the council directs administration to sunset the seniors companionship program from its base level of service. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Okay, then we move to 4.6, which is summer ice at the Memorial Sports Center. Again, I'll put a recommendation on the floor. Recommendation reads, the council directs administration to start a pilot project for summer ice availability starting July 8th to September 14th, 2024. And that council directs administration to sell summer ice as final sale ice permits. And that administration bring a report to council at the end of the pilot project to report on the success of the project. Again, prior discussion, mover and seconder. Councillor McTaggart and Councillor Mackey. Okay, any discussion on this one? Councillor Bernetta.
Unless it's going to make us money, I'm not in favor. I realize it's a pilot, and hopefully once you run a pilot, sometimes it takes off, but we just had a very difficult decision or discussion around budget, and I can't see adding more services, more stress on our staff, more of the same. Doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Behan?
I have to, through you, Mr. Mayor, I do tend to agree with Councillor Bernetta in that, we're trying to cut the budget, and here we are now adding to it. $5,000 is minuscule in the grand scheme of things, I understand. And I also do recognize the economic growth potential that this pilot may bring or generate down the road. I guess my question for Mr. Young would be, right now we're anticipating a $5,000 give or take loss or cost to the municipality at 291 hours committed that we have right now. There's still another 460 hours, I believe it is, that it would potentially be available. Do you have an idea of how many of those hours would have to be committed to so we sort of break even or even start making money? And is that target reasonable to achieve or feasible to achieve? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. So the current projection of those 290 committed hours are based on our current user groups that are committed to bringing summer ice programs to the Memorial Sports Center. So when we look at the user fee bylaw price for youth ice per hour, and that we've put on a minimum of 2 hours for summer ice, we can see that we are 50 to 100 hours away from making up that $5,000. I don't have the calculator for the exact number of hours. And it's important to note that we have not brought this discussion to the rest of the market, to our neighboring communities that potentially would take on some of these additional ice times, as well as the bake-ups in revenues from our shinny programs, public skating programs, and other programs that we could do with low staff resources through the Memorial Sports Center. So to answer the question about making up that $5,000, the first hurdle is to hit the targeted goal of the committed ice, and then put it out to market to see how successful this can be. Because right now it's all speculation on costs. and not actual.
Councillor McTaggart.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, the 291 hours you have solid commitment on at this point? So we're fairly close. I have a concern that I don't want it to cost us money. But the other side of it may be an economic generator for the community in terms of restaurants and hotel rooms and whatnot, which is positive for a business in the community. And that reason I would support it. At one point, you're going to have a go or no go on this. And when is that and what would it be?
Go ahead.
Thank you through the chair. So we have the April 15th cutoff date for if we were to go forward with this recommendation today. We would start with contacting those committed ICE users, and it would be an April 15th cutoff date for them to confirm their ICE sales before opening that up to the markets to add additional sales on. So that gives us a month and a half roughly to follow up with these groups and get a better baseline of what we're looking at for our projected revenues.
Thank you. Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you and to Mr. Young again. I see you've got sort of three options here that I see listed here, and hopefully I'm again reading correctly. If we just do the 3.5 weeks in July, the cost would be about $5,300. If we did the July and August, the 8 weeks full, it'd be $5,200 roughly. But if we just did August, the 4.5 weeks, we'd actually make $70. So is an option there that we just do it for August for this year and see how it goes, or do you still want to do it for both months? But I see that it seems like there's some substantial savings just by doing it in August alone. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, through the chair. The suggestion would be that we would go August before July, and because we wouldn't go July and then skip August. And so out of the committed ICE conversations that we've had with our user groups, the majority of their hours, we can see 185 hours being in August. So that's made up of an annual hockey camp that has been established and always runs in that second last week, or historically runs in that second last week of August. And then with the groups being more keen on utilizing August hours. So that is an option if we decide to go that way.
Councillor Olson, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And it's more of a comment, I suppose, at this point. I just wanted to say to Mr. Young that this was a really proactive and I think innovative and economic benefit to our community for the summer. And I anticipate you will not have an issue filling those hours whatsoever. We would be the only community in the region in July that would have open ice time. It is, Kenora doesn't do it, Dryden doesn't do it, Eagle Lake doesn't hold that ice space anymore. Yet we have up to 5 regional teams that play all summer long. So they're going to be seeking out, this additional ice time, including our local youth, as an opportunity to continue to hit the ice. Wasn't great this winter with being able to use the outdoor rinks. That was a lot of the feedback that we got with the weather, right? So I'm really excited. And I think as soon as you put this out to other communities, I know you just did this on a local scale and almost met the need, opening it up to International Falls, Kenora, Dryden, the First Nation communities, you will be full. So I look forward to seeing another report with those commitments from our community to utilize the ice time.
Thanks, Councillor Olson. Councillor Mackey and then Councillor Behan. Go ahead, Councillor Mackey.
Thank you, Worship. I am going to concur with Councillors McTaggart and Olson. I think this is a great idea. We need to do it. It could generate some revenue. We don't know at this point. There is a cutoff where April 15th. So if Mr. Young doesn't get another single hour booked, well, then you can decide from there. But I suspect, and I agree with Councillor Olson, this is going to fill up fairly quickly. He's already filled it almost half up in a heartbeat. So I think we would be remiss for the sake of a few dollars to not give this a go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to maybe Mr. Young. So we talked about this go or no-go date of April 15th. If we find out we don't have enough to have it for both July and August, would our fallback position be just offer it in August, or would we not offer it at all? I'm thinking I would certainly lean towards just offering it in August, because at least we don't lose any money on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Manager Young.
Through the chair, the option or the way forward there would be at that April 15th cutoff to bring a report forward to council for council to then make that decision based off of what sales we do have. I do want to point out as an addition to that question that the recommendation also includes a final sale component to this, meaning that if after the April 15th cutoff we have groups that are looking at canceling their permits, that they are still committed to the cost of that permit, so that that we're not losing money after that cutoff date because of a changed mind from an organization.
Thank you. Councillor Kircher.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's, I like to hear about increased revenue as opposed to cutting costs. So I agree. And I think your instinct is right on. It's, you know, ice time is something everybody wants 12 months out of the year. So I'm very much in favor.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments before I call the question? All in favor? That's carried. Okay, that brings us to 4.9. Again, I'll put a resolution on the floor. The recommendation reads that Council approve report AR-24-0518, recommending the staffing addition of an environmental and quality compliance coordinator to the 2024 operating budget. This role will be part of the Operations and Facilities Division and would report directly to the environmental superintendent. The role would be budgeted primarily to the water and sewer budget, 85% of the cost would go there, with an allocation to the waste budget of 15%. And that administration can immediately proceed with the process required to fill this newly created role. A mover and seconder, please. Councillor Bien, Councillor Bernetta. Okay, discussion. Councillor Bien.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Again, I hearken back to what we talked about last time. Here we are trying to cut budgets, trim our budget down. Here we are now looking at something to add to our budget. But in reading this report, it seems like this is a position that is almost essential. And I guess I got two questions. Is it the reason we're looking at this is because it's administration is realizing or recommending that this is too much a burden for one person to handle as our environmental superintendent, and we need that another job to help with all these regulations that we have to follow? And then my second part of my question would be, we passed a water and sewer budget last week with the fees and rates, and I'm wondering what impact this would have on that. 15% is going towards landfill. That's, so we're looking at $13,000 add to our operating budget. But I'm just curious what that $76,000 will impact the water and sewer in terms of reserves. And I'm sorry, it should be Mr. Miller I'm asking this to. Sorry, my apologies. My apologies. Mr. Miller, yes. What kind of impact that would have then on what we just passed in terms of we're projecting a $25,000 surplus with a $76,000 expenditure we weren't anticipating a week ago. How does that affect that? Thank you.
Manager Miller.
Thank you through the chair. The real genesis of this has been, I guess, at the heart of this has been this CLI ECA process that has been introduced by the Ministry for Sanitary and Stormwater Management. What's really, it's kind of like when you get the weather and the swirling clouds before the tornado forms. That's kind of where we feel like we're at right now. Everyone is seeing the ministry laying all this groundwork for stormwater and sanitary wastewater, where they're going to start putting more of an emphasis on that as well as drinking water, to expect municipalities to get in, to start testing the water through a sampling routine, having procedures and processes and standard operating methods in place. So that's one thing that we're anticipating, and as well, the ongoing regulations within the drinking water side of things, and then the added burden that we've been seeing for the last increasing over the last 2 years has been the landfill side of things. We're getting much more engagement by the Ministry of the Environment with our operations, looking for increased water sampling, and with that analysis of the water and interpretation of the results, as well as the actual operation of the landfill. And as the CAO has previously referenced, we're on the verge of a landfill expansion or a closure of the current cell and an expansion of a new cell. With that will surely come a new ECA for the town with operating rules and regulations unlike anything that we're used to at this time. So this position is really laying that starting to lay that groundwork. It's kind of being done obviously off my desk and off some of the operators that support the reporting and compliance. However, it is becoming a larger and larger part every day. In terms of cost, as you mentioned, there's a smaller cost to the landfill operations, that 15% component. That's something that will roll into the operation of the landfill over time. And then in terms of the water and sewer, it would be basically rolled into the cost, and it would impact the contribution to reserves at the end of the day. Obviously, it's, for sake of round numbers, 100,000, 85% is 85,000. So it's going to take that contribution away from reserves on a prorated basis for this year.
Yes.
Are we planning to, would that breakdown be the same in subsequent years, 85 to water and sewer, 15 to landfill? Is that what you're anticipating going forward?
Through the chair,
yes.
I would expect so. If we saw a noticeable shift where landfill or other operations took up a more significant component or a lesser component, the ratios would be adjusted accordingly. How many hours of summer race is that, Nathan?
Yep. CEO Rob, you want to comment?
Yeah, if I can just add to Mr. Miller's comments, in terms of impacts to water and sewer rates that we just we just passed. We just took over the wastewater treatment plant at a very substantial savings, which wasn't contemplated in our rate setting exercise either, because that all took place after the financial plan was put in. So, part of the reason why we do financial plans every 4 years is things change, and the financial outlook changes, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But I think this is with those two changes, it kind of works out to a wash.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes, Councilor McTaggart.
Thank you, Worship, through you. To Mr. Miller. So presently, you're doing this work?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, thank you. Follow up if I may?
Yes.
And you see this being a full-time job going ahead?
Go ahead.
Absolutely, especially as right now we are doing what is required. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to take it to the next level where we are not just being reactive and hitting the deadlines, but advancing our procedures and our processes and getting ahead of legislation, and being able to do the continual improvement that's required in these systems.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Brunetta.
So once again, we see government legislation or requirements increasing the burden on municipalities. And I'm just wondering how the small municipalities do it. It just baffles me that we can continue to have all these things put on us, and then, of course, impacting our taxpayers. So it's just, it's just a continuation of the same story.
I echo your concerns. Just for clarification, This is not really impacting our operational budget. It's coming out of sewer and water.
That is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Mackey?
Thank you, Your Worship. To Mr. Miller, then, this new position, is it possible that we could contract some of that person's duties to EMO or any of the other smaller communities that they can't afford to hire somebody full-time, but if they needed services, we could provide those at a fee?
Through the
Mr.
chair.
Miller?
I'm not going to say no.
Is here, Rob?
So in the past, speaking just to drinking water quality management system, in the past we have done internal auditing for Dryden, Kenora, and EMO for their water plants at a fee.
Councillor Kircher, did you have a question or a comment?
I did, but I think it's mostly to mitigate risk going forward to ensure you're safe, we're safe.
Absolutely. It's risk management and compliance to the regulations.
Last chance before I call the question. Calling the question. All in favor? That's carried. I didn't see anyone opposed. Okay. We have one item to deal with in closed session. So I'll put a resolution on the floor that council now meet in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to the senior center management composition and compensation. This is a personal matter about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Brunetta, Councillor McTaggart. Councillor Kircher?
I may be wrong, but we're not actually going in camera to speak about the individual. It's about the position, are we not?
Council now meet in camera to address the matter. It's about the position, yes, and
so by going in camera, we're inferring we're talking about the person that currently occupies that position, but we're not, are we?
I assume that the discussion, that person's name will come up in the discussion.
But it's not
primarily about that particular individual. It's about the position, but there is an identifiable individual who likely will arise in the discussion.
I don't think we should be going in camera for that.
Well, again, I'll ask the council's thought on this by calling the question. Councilor Bernardi, do you
Yeah, if we were speaking about a position where there were several incumbents in the position, they would not be identifiable. But there's actually only one person in this position, so it is obvious that it is that person who would be impacted by this decision.
So any further discussion on this? I'll call the question. All in favor? It's carried. Opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Okay, so for those watching virtually, we'll be going in camera and then we'll come and report in public session. Okay, we're back. We discussed a position filled by an identifiable individual, and we're going to put a resolution to be voted on in open session on the floor. And the recommendation reads that Council directs administration to keep the suggested increase to the Sister Kennedy Centre honorarium for a total of $24,000 for the 2024 budget year, and that administration explores additional volunteer support opportunities using the increase to the honorarium for the center, and that council direct administration to evaluate the work completed by the volunteer role and develop a viable solution for staff volunteer support for consideration in the 2025 budget cycle. Prior to discussion, I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Brunetta, Councillor Bien. Any discussion on this resolution? Actually, it's a motion until it's voted on. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. No one was opposed. And that brings us to the final motion. And the recommendation reads that having reached the hour of 7:49 p.m., we now adjourn. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor McTaggart and Councillor Mackey. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Well, thanks, Councillor, and thanks, administration, for a rather arduous session, but we accomplished some things.